Before we relate what happened next, we need to define an important academic term, ambivalence. Ambivalence is defined in the dictionary as uncertainty or fluctuation, especially when caused by inability to make a choice or by a simultaneous desire to say or do two opposite or conflicting things. In psychology, it is the coexistence within an individual of positive and negative feelings toward the same person, object, or action, simultaneously drawing him or her in opposite directions. In simple language, it is to love and hate the same thing. It is a kind of self-deception. With that in mind, let us see what took place after the female genital mutilation episode. Living in the USA, Samir and Samira had already heard about evil practices against women in the Muslim world like polygamy, female genital mutilation, child marriage, and wife beating, but one day the couple heard about a practice that they had never heard of before. It is a practice known as al-zar. They had no clue as to whether it had any religious justifications. But since it is observed only by Muslim women, they decided to include it in their fieldwork. It is very rare that men involve themselves in this aspect of Muslim life. Al-zar is customarily performed on a Muslim woman deemed to be suffering from serious psychological problems or under the spell of black magic. For some time, Samira noticed that one of the three rival wives started to behave in a strange manner. She was the newest, youngest, prettiest, and the most favored one by her polygamist husband. Samira had already shared her observations with her husband. Samir had ventured that she should watch that wife very closely and try to ascertain the problem. He believed them to be early symptoms of a psychological disorder. Samira reported that the woman began to scream for no reason and hallucinating during the day. She also started to speak obsessively about sex and claimed that her husband was having sex with her every minute and every second. Everybody around her knew that she was not telling the truth, but she was imagining things that were happening to her. Usually, a Muslim woman is not prone to talk openly about her sex life. Her frankness in such private matter did not sit well in that strict society. She also used to imagine people visiting her and conversing with her. It was public knowledge that she would talk by herself while claiming that there were people standing in front of her and speaking to her. Sometimes, she spoke gibberish that no one could understand. She claimed she could speak in foreign tongues to the foreigners who visited her every day. Gradually, her problem increased in severity until she began to beat her body and attack anybody came near her. She started to lose the hair on her head and wither away day by day. Sakina suggested that they should perform al-zar on the sick wife. She made that suggestion because she believed that someone had worked black magic on the young wife. She was wife number 3. Samir via Samira tried to convince Sakina that the wife was suffering from psychological illness and she needed to be sent to a psychiatrist. Samir had majored in psychology and his assessment of the symptoms pointed to a medical problem. The Sudanese, however, have a very low opinion of psychoanalysis. Sakina strongly contested Samir's diagnosis and stood firm in her claim of black magic being the culprit. She argued that even the Prophet Muhammad with all his holiness and divine protection was placed under the power of black magic when a Jewish boy cast spells on him. Before we proceed any further, let us first attempt to cast some light on the mechanics of this type of dispute. According to the Prophet Muhammad's biography, he came under the influence of black magic and behaved exactly like the third wife. He used to claim that he had sex with his wives when he hadn't. He lost the hair of his head and began to wither away day after day. If Sakina's arguments were true, then we would be able to find some religious justification or authorization to the practice of al-zar. According to Aisha, magic was worked on Allah's apostle so that he used to think that he had sexual relations with his wives while he actually had not. Then one day he said, "O Aisha, do you know that Allah has instructed me concerning the matter I asked him about? 2 men came to me and one of them sat near my head and the other sat near my feet. The one near my head asked the other, 'What is wrong with this man?' The latter replied, 'The man is under the effect of magic.' The first one asked, 'Who has worked magic on him?' The other replied, Labid ibn al-Asam, a man from Bani Zurayk who was an ally of the Jews and was a hypocrite. Sahih al-Bukhari, Volume 7, Hadith number 660. The kind of magic that was worked on the Prophet Muhammad was described by one of his followers as the worst one. Urway related that Aisha said, "The Messenger of Allah, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, was bewitched so that he would imagine that he had had intercourse with his wives when he had not." Sufyan said, "This is the worst type of magic when it does that." Sahih al-Bukhari, Book of Medicine, Hadith number 79. For 6 months, the Prophet of Islam remained in a state of not knowing what he was doing and fell very sick and lost the hair of his head due to that powerful magic. The Messenger of Allah, Allah bless him and give him peace, had a Jewish servant boy. The Jews approached him and kept after him until he gave them some fallen hair from the Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace, as well as a few teeth from his comb. The Jews used these to cast a spell of black magic on him. The person who was behind this was the Jew Labid ibn al-Asam. He then put the hair in a well belonging to Banu Zurayk called Darwan. The Messenger of Allah, Allah bless him and give him peace, fell ill for a period of 6 months during which the hair of his head fell off. He imagined that he slept with his wives when he did not, and was withering away without knowing the reason. Asbab Nuzul Surat Al-Falaq, Surah 113, verses 1-5, Ali ibn Ahmed al-Wahidi. The biography of the Prophet Muhammad mentioned that when he experienced the power of black magic, his Allah ordered him to use 5 verses from a chapter in the Quran to help him to get rid of the spell. Surat Al-Falaq 113, 1-5. Women use the Al-Zar hoping for exactly the same result. When Muslim men have similar problem, they seek the help of religious men to treat them through the recitation of verses in the Quran. This is called al-Ruqya al-Sharia, or lawful exorcism. The verses of the Quran are written on a piece of paper and wrapped and finally made in an amulet or talisman, and the patient will be told to wear it all time. There is another practice of trying to get rid of evil spirit or evil eye through physically whipping the demon-possessed person. We will not go into that because it doesn't have a religious basis. Women are not allowed to wear amulets or talismans because they are considered religiously impure and unclean, especially during their menses and child delivery. That being denied to them, Muslim women fall to the Al-Zar as their only option for relief. What Samira described to Samir resembled an exorcism. At this point, the third wife's illness had progressed to the point that it had robbed her of movement. She could not leave her sickbed or move a limb. The only movement she could muster were her eyes. She had lost all her hair. She was hand-fed by Sakina and Salwa. Of course, the other 2 rival wives wished for her death and eagerly awaited it. They avoided all contact for fear of contagion. According to Sakina and Salwa, the 2 wives were behind that problem. They were the ones who had paid a faqih, a witch doctor or wizard, to work the worst sort of black magic on the third wife. They also supplied him with a few strands of her hair and comb. She was, after all, the youngest, the prettiest, and most favored one. This information was whispered in Samira's ear by Salwa. On the day the Al-Zar was performed, many women attended the rites. Samira was puzzled by the huge gathering of the women. Even on the so-called happy occasion of the female genital mutilation did not command such a crowd. Every woman was brought by her father or husband. Each man left as soon as his female relative entered the house. None of them stepped a foot inside the butcher's house. It would mean war if any man dared to step inside the taboo ground of the women's section. He would be slain on the spot and his blood would be upon his head. In a short time, the house compound was crowded with women, old and young. Female children below the age of 9 and all male children were not allowed to attend the rituals. Needless to say, no men were in sight. This was exclusively a women's social ritual. Al-Zar commences with the slaughter of a big calf, and its blood is then applied on the forehead, head, hands, and legs of the possessed wife. The woman who was in charge of Al-Zar was an elderly woman. She was called Al-Shika. That was not her name, but an honorable title. It is the feminine of the sheikh. It means big religious leader. It is similar to a rabbi, bishop, or guru. In this context, the religious leaders are believed to have some kind of charisma or divine anointment. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries, sheikh stands for a royal position such as prince, sultan, and sultana. The Al-Shika was the biggest woman Samira had ever seen. When she spoke, her voice was thick as a man's. Her hair was dyed red with henna. She did not bother to cover her head, looking distinctively different from the other Sudanese women. From Salwa, Samira learned that the Al-Shika originally Turkish, born and bred in Sudan. In front of her, a huge drum known as the dalaka was placed prominently. On her left side, another woman sat, with yet another big dalaka in front of her. She, on the other hand, was a Kurd. All other women were black Sudanese except for the two. The Al-Shika was surrounded by a group of women who were her choir. The lifeless body of the possessed wife was lying on the ground inside the circle that had been created by the huge gathering of women. Every woman was sitting on the ground either cross-legged or on bended knees. Suddenly, the cricket bat-like hands of the Al-Shika began to hammer the huge drum. The other woman also followed suit. The choir began to sing in unison at this point. It was more shouting rather than singing. It wasn't a merry celebration. Samira tried to understand through her interpreter what those women were saying, but the interpreter wasn't able to grasp a single word. Then, she consulted Salwa, but she also said she knew nothing of what they were singing. Samira forgot about her inquiry when another strange action caught her attention. She saw suddenly the lifeless body of the possessed wife spring like a rocket fired out of the ground. She was jumping on her feet, dancing hysterically. She was jumping, bouncing, shouting, throwing her hands on the air, and spreading her legs as someone discovered a cobra moving beneath her. She was going in circles. Her sudden action made every woman to shout for joy. For them, it was a good omen in the power of Al-Zar to have produced such quick results. The next development of the dance puzzled Samira. All women went on their knees and started to dance and swing their heads violently on all directions, like table fans. Some of them were laughing, some crying, some weeping, and some making funny sounds. None of them was standing on her feet except the possessed wife. They looked like they were being electrocuted and had lost all bodily function. They started to look like they were possessed. Samira's heart was gripped with fear, but she controlled herself. She was standing out of the huge circle, surrounded by Salwa, Sakina, Mona, and Rose. So far, they were the only ones not taken in with the rhythm of the dance and the grip of the forces at hand. Samira observed the women closely and asked Salwa to explain what she was observing. While she was conversing with her, Salwa was carried away by the current and began to shake and move like the other women. Samira was terrified, noticing how Salwa's face and eyes changed. Her eyes widened and her face became pale. Her head covering fell from her head. Samira sprang away from her and began to pray and ask God for protection. Soon after, Salwa fell to her knees and began to jerk violently. She was swinging her head as if she wanted to dislocate it from the rest of her body. Her head kept bouncing up and down like a basketball. Samira moved as far as she could from her friend Salwa. By then, the old widow also tossed herself into the convulsing group and began moving like them. She began to scream and utter unintelligible words and swing her head all around her body. Only the three foreign girls were remained standing on their feet and looking with great amazement at what was going on. All Sudanese women, young and old, were crawling on their knees, swinging their heads, and jerking their bodies except the Al-Shika, her assistant, the choir, and the sick wife. The possessed wife was the only one who was running in circles and doing all kinds of gymnastic movements. This dancing ritual went on for a long time. Samira was puzzled by the fact that only she and her helpers were still in control of themselves. Would they also eventually get caught up in that satanic ritual? Before she found an answer to her question or explanation to that strange phenomenon, Samira suddenly heard the woman in charge shouted the loudest sound she ever heard, "Bass!" Like a magical word, that bass brought everything to stillness, and dead silence ensued. One could hear a pin drop. Samira understood the word without the need for translation because the same word was used in Hindi language and with the same meaning, enough or stop it. Briefly the possessed wife stopped her movements, but she started all over again. The al-Shika got irritated and shouted even more loudly, "I said bass." The possessed woman ceased her movements and stood up like an alabaster statue. When the al-Shika saw that the possessed woman was still standing on her feet, she started talking to her. "What is your demand?" asked the al-Shika. "I want to smoke a cigarette," replied the possessed woman. "Give him a cigarette to smoke." The al-Shika was speaking in masculine to the possessed woman as if she was a man. The possessed also was speaking as a man rather than a woman. In addition, she was talking in a broken Arabic as if it wasn't her mother tongue. She was pronouncing it in a funny accent as foreigners do when they try to speak Arabic. At once, one of the choir women brought a cigarette and handed it over to the possessed woman. Then, she used a matchstick and lit the cigarette for her. The possessed wife began to smoke as if she was an experienced smoker. She neither coughed nor made any expression to indicate that it was her first time smoking. Samira's wonder reached beyond her comprehension. In a Muslim country, a young Muslim woman smoking a cigarette in front of everyone. "Do you have any more demands?" resumed the al-Shika. "I want a shirt and trouser," responded the possessed woman, while she was still smoking her cigarette. A couple of women brought shirt and trouser and handed them over to her. Samira could not believe her eyes when she saw the young woman stripping all her clothes off and then putting on the shirt and trouser. The clothes fitted her perfectly as if they were tailored especially for her. Samira had never seen any Sudanese woman, even a small female child, putting on shirt and trouser. All the women she saw in Khartoum city and Nayad town were covered from head to foot by Sudanese saris and concealed their heads and hair with hijabs. Some of them put on the Saudis' abayas, cloaks, and covered their faces with niqabs. Samira felt a bit embarrassed to see a young Muslim woman standing in her underwear and bra in the midst of such a huge gathering of women and then putting on shirt and trouser. Thereafter, the possessed woman was mysteriously transformed from a dumb Sudanese woman into a beautiful Western girl. She looked more feminine and more beautiful. "What is your jinni?" shouted again the al-Shika. "Khoja," replied the possessed woman. Through her interpreter, Samira learned that the word Khoja means a white man. Samira foolishly asked her interpreter to explain to her why the possessed wife claimed that the demon that possessed her was the white man and not a black man. The Eritrean girl was as clueless as her. "Master Khoja, before you leave, do you have any more demands?" asked the al-Shika. "I want whiskey to drink," demanded Mr. Khoja. "We don't have whiskey. We have sherry and vodka." "Give me sherry." "Give him sherry to drink." One woman brought a bottle of sherry and gave it to Mr. Khoja. The possessed woman grabbed the bottle and opened it immediately. She then hurriedly emptied half of it in her stomach. After consuming half of the bottle, she asked for another cigarette. When the cigarette was given to her, she asked for a chair. An armchair was brought to her. It seemed that, if Mr. Khoja asked for the moon, the women would have tried to procure it. The possessed woman sat on the chair, and folded her right leg and placed it on her left knee. She then emptied the rest of the sherry bottle in her mouth and began to smoke her second cigarette. She was like a great Arab sultana surrounded by her royal entourage. Her jinni was like the one that sprang out of the Aladdin magical lamp and ready to fulfill her 3 wishes. Samira began to converse again with her friend Salwa, who by then came out of her trance. She asked her whether the bottle contained a real sherry or just red grape juice. Salwa assured her that the bottle contained a real alcohol. Samira was perplexed by such a strange behavior in a Muslim country. She did not know what to say or what to ask anymore. Her brain could not digest anything anymore. She had witnessed the incredible happening in front of her eyes. Even if her husband Samir had seen it and told her about it, she wouldn't believe him. How a young married Muslim woman could be allowed to ask for smoke, dress up in shirt and trouser, drink alcohol in her own house, and most probably with the prior knowledge of her Muslim husband. Samira was just wondering what the possessed wife would demand further. Das Adarkum Alad Mama, Das Adarkum Awalad Mama, repeated the Al-Shika. She was no longer shouting. This time, she spoke to Mr. Khawaja with all due respect. The interpreter could not interpret that difficult Arabic phrase. Loosely translated could possibly mean "What is your constitution, O children of Mama?" but no idea who was that Mama. "I want to drink blood." "Blood of man," shouted the possessed woman with so much anger and determination. "Give him blood to drink," responded the Al-Shika. Someone came running along with a big glass of red liquid in hand. At first, Samira was under the impression that the liquid was a juice symbolizing human blood, and she decided to confirm her conclusion by consulting with Salwa. She was certain that the women could not possibly extract that amount of blood from a person in such a short time. Even Aladdin's genie could not be that fast. But, Salwa refuted Samira's suspicions and announced with all confidence that it was a real blood. Samira refused to believe her and asked her to confirm it under solemn oath that it indeed real blood. Salwa swore by Allah and pain of blindness to both her eyes that it was blood, but that of a slaughtered calf. By then, the possessed woman had fully consumed the blood and tossed the empty glass away, not bothering whose head it might land on. With eyes full of fire, she looked angrily at the woman in charge and shouted, "I want whip." Someone immediately responded to her demand and gave her a long whip. Samira was so frightened when she saw the possessed woman standing in the middle holding in her right hand a cat-o'-nine-tails whip. Was she about to rampage and scourge every woman she did not like or anyone looked like a man? Samira saw the possessed woman pacing up and down like a restless person and striking the air with her whip. Meanwhile, she was challenging an imaginary man with the filthiest language could possibly be uttered by a married Sudanese woman. "Come out before me, you coward of a man! Come to me and I will skin your flesh out with my whip. I will fuck you up with my zib, penis. I am a Khawaja with a big mustache. Come here and fight with me, Yawad Alman Ioka, O son of a fucking bitch. Ko Somak Yawad al Sharmuda, I will fuck up your mother's pussy, O son of a prostitute." The possessed woman went on and on until she lost her voice. No one reproached her nor challenged her. At length, the big drum came to life when Al-Shika's huge hands fell on them like hammers. The singing, shouting, crying, jerking of bodies, and swinging of heads resumed, with the possessed woman jumping, dancing, and cracking her whip into the air. It was simply luck that she didn't hit any of the attending women. Of course, there was no man to come forth and answer her challenge of a fight. After a similar round of hysterical dancing, Samira heard the familiar command, "Bass." The second bass brought about a different result from the first one. It did not only brought everything to stop, but the possessed woman fell to the ground, unconscious. She fell like she had been shot in her head at close range. 3 women covered her with a big red sari. That done, they bore her into the room from which they had brought her out from before. Samira noticed every woman smiling and whispering into the ears of their respective neighbors. She surmised their elation indicated that the Alzar ritual was a success and had delivered the required result. Salwa confirmed her guess and added that the genie of the white man had left peacefully without hurting the third wife because all his demands were met. Soon after, huge trays of cooked delicious Sudanese dishes and soft drinks were served to all the women. The American couple kept pondering over the delivery dance for quite a long time. Since that day, Samira kept a close watch on the third wife, but did not see any of demonic or psychological symptoms manifest itself again. She looked entirely normal, much her usual self as before the incident. At first, the couple came to the conclusion that she was truly possessed, but could not understand how the satanic ritual released her from her demons. Not finding convincing explanation, Samir was inclined to look at the matter as a psychological problem. He reasoned out that, the wife number 3 was like any oppressed and abused Muslim woman, but her coping skills could no longer deal with the negative stimuli around her and she suffered a serious psychological problem. Her psychological problem was caused by the oppression and abuse she suffered since childhood under the hands of her father and brothers, and continued with her marriage to her polygamist husband. The descriptions of Samira of the way the wife number 3 behaved on the day of the Al-Zar ritual, led Samir to this conclusion. According to him, the deeply oppressed soul of the woman could not rebel due to the religious restrictions imposed on her since childhood. The religious restrictions gave the man full rights over her. There was nothing she could do to free herself from her shackles. If she tried to protest or rebel, she would go against what she herself held as sacred in her Muslim society. She hated what she loved, she abhorred what she venerated, and she loathed the man whom she longed to have. She was caught up in an ambivalent state with absolutely no way out. Only someone else other than herself and from outside of her society and country could deliver her from her problems. That day, with her demands, she had rebelled against all her religious restrictions and her draconian social system, which showed favor to the man and allowed him to oppress women. Otherwise, why did she want to become man, smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, and consume the blood of man? She wanted to dress up like man and not a woman. Why did she pretend to be possessed by the spirit of a white man who had a big mustache and looked for a man to challenge him in a fight? For her, the white man was the symbol of power. It was he that colonized and controlled Sudan for the longest time. The whip was one of the tools that her father, brothers, and husband had used to curtail any insolence from her. She wanted a whip to show that she also possessed the power of a man, not that of a cowardly Sudanese man, but the authority of a powerful white man. Samir's psychoanalysis of a rebellious oppressed soul was confirmed when Selwood told his wife about another young woman exhibited even more extreme behavior under the same rights. The woman had likewise demanded a shirt and pants, cigarettes, a bottle of vodka, and the blood of man. After she consumed half of the vodka and drank the symbolic blood, she demanded a liver and a heart of man to be given to her because she wanted to eat them. When those organs were presented to her, she devoured them raw. In Sudan, eating raw meat of some organs of a slaughtered animal is not considered too morbid. After that, she demanded a sword. When a double-edged sword was given to her, a great disaster took place. The young woman managed to run out of the house into the streets in men's garments with the big double-edged sword in her right hand. She started to attack and chase only men. Women were spared. This occurred on a Friday holiday, with the public market was crowded with merchants, customers, beggars, and loafers. Every man fled for his life at the sight of a deranged woman brandishing a sword making her way towards him. She entered the market from one end and when she came out the opposite end she had emptied out the whole market. Hundreds of men took flight from her attack. They fled town and headed for the desert. For them, it was like the Second Battle of Uhud, when the Muslim Mujahideen were chased by the polytheist army of Mecca and had to leave their Prophet Muhammad fallen in a ditch beaten up and seriously wounded. The fleeing Mujahideen of Uhud were lucky enough to find a mountain and a cliff to hide in, but the men of En-Nayd market had no such refuge except the arid desert. Before she could kill any man, the local policeman managed to stop her. The police followed her in their wagon to the outskirts of town, where they rammed her with their patrol car. She was injured and eventually arrested. That brave woman ended up in the worst jail in the world. It was known as the Shala Central Prison. Shortly after her detention, she was tried and convicted. She was given the maximum sentence and sent to Shala Central Prison to serve 14 years of hard labor. The judge wanted her hanged, but the jury did not back up his decision because the suspect's crime did not deserve capital punishment. In reality, Shala wasn't even a prison. It was a heavily secured area where the worst criminals were kept. It had no dorms or cells. The prisoners had no roofs over their heads, and had to protect themselves somehow from the blazing sun of Africa. They used their own clothes to protect their heads from the heat during the day and the cold during the night. Besides that, they had to protect themselves from the scorpions and snakes of the arid desert. All of these hardships were nothing compared to the human beasts the prisoner had to fight against in order to survive in Shala. A prisoner might survive in a Roman amphitheater fighting against gladiators and wild beasts, but the notorious prison of Nyala city was quite another story. Ever since that incident, the Alzar al-Shika disallowed deadly weapon during the ritual. She would concede to an empty revolver or any rifle, but nothing more. She also banned the use of all other hand weapons such as axes, swords, daggers, knives, hammers, hatchets, spades, etc. Samir had hoped that his wife would get another chance to attend another Alzar ritual so that they could learn more about it. Salwa told Samira that the Alzar dance would be performed only on a woman possessed by the Al-Jani al-Ahmar, the red Jani or demon, or the Al-Ri al-Ahmar, the red wind. Salwa said that the woman who was in charge of the Alzar, al-Shika, was herself possessed by a Jani, but she was on good terms with her Jani, her demon. She inherited her demon from her mother who got it from her mother, and so on. Since the demon passed through inheritance, he was not harmful, but a good demon. The Malays, Indonesians, and the Southeast Asian Muslims have the same thing. They are called sakas. Some benign, some are not. As Muslims, they coexist in a spirit world with shamans and witch doctors, tolerated even in this day of Android phones and superbikes. The American couple found it difficult to believe the concept of an inherited demon, good or otherwise. According to their Christian faith, no one can pass a demon to his progeny, and there is nothing called a good demon. The demon is the demon. He is a fallen angel and hence called an evil spirit and does nothing good, but evil. The Southeast Asian Muslims believe, as it is written, that there are spirits that inherit this world. Some of which are Muslims and fear Judgment Day. All, according to them, fear the Quran, or whomever wields it. Albeit with some ceremonial props. They are used for everything. Women, business, influencing decisions, causing trouble, stealing. Posters abound advertising services ridding you of bad luck and these spirits.